my folks who watch on YouTube, and to the folks who are here in the auditorium, and to those who are watching on the live stream here on the 24th of October 2021 on Magic Mountain. Really grateful to be able to be here with everyone. And for those who might not be aware, there's a history to this service, and in my own opportunity to be the presider of the service in the last decade or more, I have developed a set of topics, and I just rotate through them. I think I have 18 topics at the moment, and so this week's topic is one that I have appreciated having a chance to speak on before, and I find it challenging. I've been thinking about it all week. It involves a word that is not terribly commonplace in our day-to-day life. The word is constancy. And I came across that word in my seminary education many years ago. And I'll speak about that, I guess, in a little bit. But the application of this idea of constancy, I want to offer some reflections on in two different ways. One is the idea of faith and constancy in the relationship that God has with us, if you believe in God of some sort. And that's a problematic area in theology. And then the other piece of it, which is really relevant, interestingly, in all theology, is how that same concept of how we think of the divine plays itself out in our interpersonal relationships and our relationships with ourselves in the natural world. My dear friend and mentor, Father Bill Hallberg, whose portrait is over there on the wall, and who I think of every Sunday, always used to like to teach about that. He used to say, if we could work on our relationships here, this relationship will sort of take care of itself. And I have that in mind a little bit as I want to speak about both the dynamics of our understanding of spirituality in a global or transcendental sense, and then also how we bring that to the way we live day to day. So let's start with the theological. I think they're both tricky. Why is it that this discussion of God's faithfulness would be difficult? Well, it's hard for people in general, in any circumstance, I think, because we're lured into a natural and well-meaning trick as often as children, especially in the Western world. So I think if you're raised in an Abrahamic tradition, Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, my guess is you're told as a child in your early religious education, in Hebrew school, Sunday school, catechism, and I don't know what the Muslim equivalent would be. But I think our teachers in those young ages need to simplify faith, and in a well-meaning way to do that, they tell us about a God who is all-loving all the time, and that if you seek a relationship with God, it's just going to be awesome. I call this the Santa Claus God problem, because you're a Sunday school teacher. That's what I grew up with. I grew up with catechism. Actually, I was a Roman Catholic kid, and I was given this idea that God was this unbelievably benevolent, gentle, loving, wonderful, accessible, reliable, beautiful sort of fountain from which to drink, and friend to which I could seek a kind of companionship with. And the challenge of that, just like the challenge of the Santa Claus idea, is that at some point, I don't mean to mess any of you up, but the Santa Claus thing might get demystified at a certain point. I hope we don't have too many little kids watching, but it's a lovely idea that gets deconstructed as you sort of peer behind the curtain. And that's one of these things that turns out to be, for Caron patients, and I think for people in other settings, in any setting in life, at some point, this blissful idea that that God's love is this perfect and consistent and reliable thing is challenged by pandemic, family member, as suicides, or a loved one who betrays us, or just one bad things happen, it's really hard to continue to have this. It becomes a seemingly naive notion that God is all that God was represented to me in my Sunday school class. And I think that's also true interpersonally. I am thinking of how I have this caricature, and I'm sure none of you lived it out, and I'm probably guilty of it, but of the teenage, insanely idealistic romance. You ever seen anybody do that? You know, the 14-year-old starry-eyed, you know, like the Romeo and Juliet. You know, we're just in love and fated to be in love and meant to be in love, and our parents don't understand, and so your parents are like, you know, like, could you dial this back a little bit? We want you to date other people and all that sort of stuff. But sometimes, you know, people just, whatever that chemistry is, they call it oxytocin, this chemical in the body that activates in the young pubescent body in this very powerful way, and the young person is overtaken by these overwhelming emotions, and they think that whoever this person is that they're attracted to is going to be their person forever, ever, ever, ever. They don't realize how both long and short life is, and how young their youth really places them on the map. And if I'm looking at the age of the community to which I'm speaking, and I have some young folks in the back, which is awesome, but my guess is all of us have at least had some of that naivete about like the perfect relationship deconstructed and demystified. You know, you think this is going to be awesome and wonderful, and if you haven't yet tried getting married, I would tell you, like, marriage is a complicated and interesting thing. Because I think it's one of these things that's sold to us as a Santa Claus-like ideal. And then when you get into the day-to-day of it, it becomes quite a different story. And I'm not saying that there aren't marriages that, not double negative, there are marriages that persist in extraordinary romanticism and blissful bonds, but they're somewhat less than the majority, and they stand out as exceptions and beacons on the hill in terms of human relationships. When more than half of marriages don't perdure, and when tremendous numbers of seemingly okay relationships suffer from infidelities that we don't even really necessarily know about or don't get talked about in community. And it is a fact that the ideal of perfection in human conduct and relationship is an ideal that is not always lived up to perfectly. So what do we do with both of those things? The problem of God and the reality of suffering, and the problem of love and the reality of our imperfect deliverance on that kind of promise to one another. And why I learned about this word has to do with a ethicist that famous at Duke. He taught at Duke in the theological school. I know he's still alive. I don't know if he's still there, but Stanley Hauerwas is the fellow's name. And Hauerwas wrote some essays on Christian ethics that really affected me as a seminary student in my move out of atheism and towards faith, and in my addiction recovery. And one of these essays was this exploration of what he called the virtue of constancy. And he said that constancy is a bit unique among the human virtues. So you have faith, hope, love, prudence, justice, temperance. These are classic Christian virtues that are cited by different writers in different settings at different times. But constancy is a virtue that Hauerwas argued, in order to really probe the depth of it, you couldn't have a phrase or a definition. You had to really look at it in terms of story. And he used certain authors to illustrate. It would be, I think it's fair to say what his point was, as it's affecting me. I've been thinking about this for decades now, is that you don't measure constancy by one instance or 1 week or 1 month or 1 day alone. You can't. Because a person shows up in a given moment does not guarantee you that they exhibit this phenomenon of constancy. Constancy is a long haul thing. And sometimes, especially in human relationships, and in this place where Magic Mountain is, I have seen what I think of as faithfulness on the part of loved ones towards the patient, that the patient has thought was betrayal, that I think of as love, that what we call the tough love, right? Where the family member says, I will support you in continuing your recovery, but I'm not going to co-sign your leaving treatment early. I'm not going to co-sign your, we're not going to keep paying for this apartment that you're staying in. We're not going to keep, writing the check, and we're not going to keep a blind eye. So, and you might feel that that's very inconstant in terms of this relationship, but the most clear instance that I think of that we see in day-to-day existence in terms of constancy in our world is the love that parents tend to give to children. And I see it messed up, sadly, too often. I've seen parents abandon children. I've seen parents do things with and around their children that I just don't understand where that comes from, because I actually believe we are evolved to manifest this kind of profound and sometimes almost stupid allegiance to our children. Like, there's a bond that, it's the mama bear thing. Like when a mother has a child and the rest of the world is like, that kid is bad news, the mom will be like, I will kill you if you say that again. And that's an organic and anthropological thing. And I think we can have that, I can have as a stepdad for my stepkids. And I think people who adopt their children, I've seen my wife have that kind of fierce love for an adopted child. And so I don't think it's just biological. I think it's this parent-child bond is a bond which has this feature of incredible constancy in the face of unbelievable challenge, right? So, and you might be one of them. You might be one of these members of a family who has burned bridge after bridge after bridge, but there's someone, it's a grandmother, or it's an aunt, or it's a mom, or it's a dad, or it's an uncle, or whatever, who's like, yeah, but they're still a part of our tribe. We still love them, and if they want to come to Thanksgiving, for God's sake, set a place at the table, and so this is what constancy is not this myth of the perfect child and the perfect family and the perfect marriage, which never has any tension, and the Norman Rockwell portrait, if you're old enough to know that allusion, which is a common sort of way we used to talk about this kind of ideal of 2.5 kids and a picket fence and all these sort of things, and heteronormative and typical stereotype, and the husband goes to work and wife stays at home, and they live this ordinary life, and she's involved in the PTA and teaches home economics, and he gets this career that stays in, and everything is just hunky-dory. It's like the Jim Carrey movie. What was that movie where he's like a fake sort of living in a bubble life? I can't think of the name of the movie. Oh, The Truman Show. Very, very interesting sort of satire on this idea of perfection and stereotype. But that's a lie. And that doesn't mean we should abandon the notion of decency and good. But where we're left, and this is what Hauerwas points us to, is to this idea that in the long run, how you have either stuck and stayed or been faithful to the deepest value of a relationship is the real deal. In other words, if we are in a back alley, do I know you're going to stay with me? That's an issue. And then I have this feeling of constancy in our relationship, is I don't need to look and see if you have turned tail and run without grabbing me and taking me with you. Because over time I've developed this faithfulness in your fidelity to what our bond is. So I want to turn that back now to the God idea and suggest that many people who come to the crisis of faith in addiction to recovery, they come in here, they've been married to opioids or gambling or sex addiction and acting out or whatever it is, and in the act of untangling themselves from this addictive process, they are encouraged to find a power greater than themselves to rely upon But the challenge of finding a power of goodness to rely on is the rubber hits the road on this broken idea of Sunday school God that doesn't measure up. How am I supposed to believe in a God? For me, this was exactly me. I had a brother who was murdered early in my recovery. And I was being fed this line from Alcoholics Anonymous of like, God, and have God be anything you want God to be. And I'm like, yeah, my brother just, I had to go with my mother to visit him with his head wrapped because he had 3 bullets in his skull. And it was very hard for me to reconcile the narrative that I was getting about God and God's, wonder and beauty and perfection with the grim reality of my mother's and my own grief. But what's evolved for me is I think a non-naive faith. I have come to look in all of the wisdom traditions that I've studied, in Christianity, in Judaism, in Buddhism, in Hinduism, and I do believe that when you study those traditions, you find, in Buddhism, you find the concept of metta, which is this loving kindness concept. And it's an ideal and a practice and a vision and a doctrine all in one. And in Judaism, the word chesed is, for the Jewish monks, is an articulation of faithfulness, the faithfulness of God against the unfaithfulness of the Israelites. And in Christianity, the witness of this solidarity that God in the Jesus incarnation manifests with human suffering. That's an instance of, that's not a pretty picture of a simple and naive love. It's a portrait of a love that jumps right in the pit of the tangle of the mess of creation and human fallibility and still says, I am here with you and I love you. And that's a kind of faith that I can put my stock in. I can try to believe that there is a power at work in this world that brings the clear sunshine after the storm. I can try to believe that in the midst of these incredible climatic changes that are going on, there could be a way in which the ecological system will someday rebalance itself. It's the long-haul portrait, rather than the instance of, I need this child to be fixed and healed right now, and it doesn't happen, and I'm disappointed in it. That is where I set myself up for theological disappointment. But if I place my faith in the ultimate victory of love and of my faith over impermanence and death and sickness and evil, then I have a chance of seeing my faith fulfilled. And that's where my trust rests, is in the ultimate victory of the God in whom I place my love. And it's also my vision of what I'm shooting for in my recovery. And it's what my notion is of my ability to be a great husband in the second marriage of my life. And I have done all of these things wrong. I was a stupid 14-year-old who was starry-eyed in love and then shipwrecked when, it turned out to be imperfect. And then I was in the first marriage in which I led a dual life in which there was a public persona of like the Truman Show, and there was a hidden underneath underbelly that wasn't really great. And today, I'm in a committed relationship which has all kinds of flaws and imperfections, but where the commitment that we have to one another is to stick and stay and work our crap through. And that's kind of how I view my sobriety. And one of the things I've really appreciated about being at Caron in the last 10 years is Caron's evolution and Alcoholics Anonymous' evolution, I think, Recovery is moving towards greater wisdom, because I think this is a thing that actually AA also sort of got wrong. It painted sobriety as never drinking and relapse as failure, and in this binary and total way. And so people who would struggle and suddenly find themselves, because their daughter was, sick, or their entire life crumbled and they took a drink, feeling like they couldn't even go back to the community that would shun and scandalize them. But there's a guy there in that room who's 20 years without a drink, but who's 13-stepping every woman who comes into the room and violating them and preying upon them, like in a gross way, or completely unhealthy with their shopping, or sex and pornography stuff. And Alcoholics Anonymous is like, oh no, that's Joe, he's 20 years sober, and he's like great, and I'm like, there's something not right about that. So, recovery is an imperfect, long-haul commitment. Marriage is an imperfect, long-haul commitment. And faith is an imperfect, long-haul commitment. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't believe in them. It's because a person speaks the truth about their imperfection that I think they are something that one can believe in. And when somebody comes in, there's a term, I need to finish up, but there's a term called spiritual bypass. And it's a not well circulated term, but it's a really important term. It was developed in California in the Transcendental School of Psychology. That's not the name of the institution, but it's a school of thought that is a psychological school that tried to be very, very intentional about including spirituality in its paradigm. And the Transcendentalists out there, not the same as Emerson and that group, these transcendental psychologists talked about spiritual bypass as the use of faith as a kind of band-aid, wallpaper. So if I were to look at my dead brother and go, oh, well, God is just all loving, all wonderful, and I don't know, I'm just going to continue to trust it. There's a ring of falseness and plasticity and genuineness about spiritual bypass. Spiritual bypass is the person who walks into the room in a circumstance of unbelievable degradation of their lives, and just says, I'm just going to trust in God. I like God to decide everything. And it's an abdication of autonomy and personal responsibility instead of what I think of as a healthier use of our relationship with a system of faith to enable us to put our nose to the grindstone and our shoulders to the wheel, and because we feel like the faith that we hold is going to accompany us in every trench. So, that's my prayer and hope for you, is that you would find in the message of today an invitation to a real journey, a hard journey. I cannot promise you it is blissful and easy. I would be lying to you. One of the toughest things I've ever done is to stay sober in the face of certain things that happened over the course of the 32 years in which I have not had a drink. And I have not avoided all the other ways addiction could sort of manifest in my life. So I do get a coin from my alcohol and drug sobriety, but I have had to practice my program diligently around fraying edges in other areas of my addiction interaction manifestations. And that's the hope that I hope you can hear and sort of grab onto, is that you can get better. You don't have to shoot for perfect. You can get better. We can get better. We can improve. Alcoholics Anonymous said beautifully when they talk about progress, not perfection. And you can actually not drink and not use drugs one day at a time successfully for an extraordinarily long period of time. Recovery in that sense is absolutely possible. It is completely in view. And it's the first thing you should shoot for. Stop using. And then stay stopped one day at a time. And then watch the insanity manifest. because now you're an unstable container. Because what you were using to sort of keep your ship afloat is now missing. You're missing one of your props, your canes. And you're going to be wobbly. So then, stay the course. Stay in the game. Stay in, this would be advice for a marriage. And this is an advice for a relationship with God. Is begin. And then the next day begin. And then the next day begin. And when it gets wobbly, ask for help. Find a new alternative. Nuance and finesse and refine the gem of which you are eventually honing until you get this beautiful diamond at the end of the work that is a life of faith and constancy. I hope you will commit to that kind of work. Thanks very much.